People who've joined the conference, and they say that you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. Now, last year I couldn't help but notice that there weren't any politicians in our midst, and this year, here they are. This is a good thing. Bitcoin is changing them. The other thing I'd like to point out is that Ms. Helen Zille here to my left didn't release a public policy statement on adopting a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Yet she has taken the floor first for the discussion before Mr. Mani over here. So, Mr. Mani, I feel like you should probably have gotten the first slot, but we like to keep things spicy over here. So for those of you who don't know much about Helen Zille, she was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as a journalist, young journalist, and she uncovered the conspiracy, the killing of Mr. Steve Biko. So that's how she cut her teeth. She got into politics in 1999. She then was responsible, in my personal opinion, for turning around the city of Cape Town into the beautiful city that it is today. So thank you personally, Helen, thank you for that. I personally am very grateful. And she is now the chairperson of the Federal Council of the DA. So with that, over to Ms. Zille. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction, and thank you for being here. I'm not quite sure why I am here, except that my son was asked to get me here, and it's very difficult to say no to him, I can assure you, as will become clear from the content of what I'm going to say. May I also say right at the beginning that he asked me to say hello to somebody here, and I can't remember who, and so if you're the guy, please come and say hello to me, because I'll have to tell him that I fulfilled what he asked me to do. So I was very moved by Luthando's talk, I must say, because he roughly described the journey that I am on. I don't think I'm nearly as far as he is, but he roughly described the journey that I'm on and opened my eyes to what's going on in Ikasi. I mean, I know that PayPal and Venmo and even Pick n Pay accept Bitcoin as tender, but I didn't know it had reached the spaza shops yet. And I didn't know it was being used for international remittances. So you learn something new every day. And I've learned a lot today. Luthando, thank you for that. But I frankly would not advise, that's just me, mothers, indigent mothers, to put their 500 rands worth of child grant into Bitcoin when it's costing 2 million rand a Bitcoin. I think that's probably a bit risky, to buy high and then sell low with the volatility that still exists. So what people do with their child grants is absolutely critical, because children need to get milk and protein and other things. So I will just say that, but I will say many, many nice things about Bitcoin today. Now, I'm very interested in Bitcoin because I'm very interested in new things, even though I don't understand them. And when a new thing comes that a lot of people start believing in, I try to find out what's going on, and usually too late, usually when the bird has flown. And usually when I do buy into stock or do anything like that, I buy high, and then when I have to sell, I sell low. So that's my history of investing. And of course, it went exactly the same way with Bitcoin. In about 2014, 2015, my younger son said he was going to put some of the money that he had saved in his short career into this thing called Bitcoin. So I said, what? So he says, Bitcoin. I said, what is this? And he said, I'll explain it to you. And I told him, like the shopkeepers tell Luthando, this is a scam. And I know a scam when I see one. But let's go a little bit further back, because, as I say, my sons have taught me a lot, and mostly about money. And the first big lesson that I had was when my eldest son was 5. And my father gave him 10 rand for his 5th birthday so that I could open a bank account for him. And he was incredibly pleased with this 10 rand. It was the first time he'd had paper money. And he was very skeptical when I said we were going to give it to the bank to keep for him. And so off we toddled to the bank, and I said, I'd like to open a bank account for my son. and whatever we went through, and he did not like this at all. I mean, I eventually forced him to hand over his 10 rand. And the next day he woke up and still very worried about his 10 rand, and he says, "Mommy, how do I know that they'll keep my 10 rand and give it back to me when I want it?" I said, "Well, we'll go and ask them today." So off I went back to the bank to the same teller, and I said to her, "My son wants to know if you've still got his 10 rand. So she pulled out a 10 rand from under the counter and she said, "Here it is." And he said, "How do I know that that's my 10 rand and not someone else's?" Now, I thought about that quite deeply because I thought it was a very profound insight. Because what it was telling me was that trust in the system is everything. Trust in the system is everything. We only give our money to the bank because we trust that they will give it to us when we come and get it out. And we trust the people who are maintaining the databases and the spreadsheets. And we trust that when we have saved up X amount, it is there and worth X amount. So fast forward to my other son who says, "I'm investing in Bitcoin." And I said, "Tom, what is this? It's nothing. It's some idea of an algorithm somewhere. You can't tell me that that has a value. What is its underlying value?" So again, he picked up a 10 rand note and he says, "Mom, what's this?" And I said, "It's a 10 rand note." He says, "It's only a 10 rand note because you think it is. And because the shop owner who's going to tell you something thinks it is, sell you something thinks it is, and because you both will agree on what you can buy and sell for 10 rand. But actually, 10 rand is a worthless piece of paper. This is a social construct in your head and in the shopkeeper's head." I said, no, it's backed by gold and everything. He said, "If you still believe that, Mom, truly, you'll believe anything." So I said, "Well, off you go and be very careful how much you put into this, but you have to learn your lessons and you have to learn them hard, and I'm terribly sorry, that is how it is going to be." Now, I didn't have any trust in the system then. And trust, of course, in the system is everything. And in 2008, if you can think back that long, trust in the financial system took a massive knock. And the financial crisis gave trust a huge knock for one simple reason. Those of us who trust the holders of the databases, trust the people who are doing the modeling, we trust them to be rational and careful with our money. And we trust them to take some risks, but we don't expect them to do crazy things like give out thousands, hundreds of thousands, probably millions of home loans to people who can't afford to repay them on the assumption that home prices will continue rising. When they can't repay them, it crashes, and all those loans turn out to be bad, and the financial system crashes. And when they do that, you and I and everybody else who has money in the bank think, "My God, what have they been doing with my money, and where's it been going, and have they been lending it to people on crazy schemes?" And then you hear about derivatives and you think, "Whoa," and you want to pull back. Now, building trust in the system again was so important that governments went to bail out the banks, because if people had wholesale across the world lost confidence and trust in the banks, we would have had to rebuild an entire financial system. But it is no coincidence that at about that time, 2008, 2009, this extraordinary, legendary Satoshi Nakamoto, who I like to think of as a woman, produced her white paper on Bitcoin. And I've tried to read that white paper, and actually I'm at the point where I'm quite understanding it, amazingly enough. Not how they get to the algorithms, but I understand what the process is. And it's not surprising that she produced that white paper just after the big crash, because she was also saying, how can we rebuild trust in the system? And trust had broken down because of the fact that people were blindly trusting without being able to see what is happening. So the brilliant insight of Satoshi Nakamoto was, instead of trusting the people who keep the databases under lock and key that you never see, How about a system where everybody can see every transaction? And you don't have to trust some anonymous person to look after your money. And can we build a system that enables everybody to see every transaction in the sequence that it happens and who is the holder of value at that time? It's quite an ingenious idea when you think about it. But the next thing is this. And this is just my understanding of it. It may be completely wrong, and I haven't been here for the rest of the day, so I'm sorry. You might have had all of this earlier. But as I understand it, Satoshi Nakamoto said this. She said, we have to match certain algorithms, and in a block, there are certain algorithms, complex and difficult, that have to be matched. And once they have been matched, a block is created that then pays you a certain number of Bitcoin, that then have a value that can be traded on open ledger accounting. People might be laughing now, but that's basically how I got to understand it. And then it is entirely transparent, and everybody knows where it is. The thing that still fascinates me today is that people can think that clever women and men working out an algorithm match can produce a block that has a store of value, but they do. And the critical thing, like with the 10 Rand note, is that people believe it. So the miracle was not that the blockchain was invented. The miracle is the transition to believing that the thing it produces, which is matched algorithms in a block that pays you Bitcoin, has real value. And that is basically social acceptance, social trust in the construct. Now, I didn't think that that transition would be possible. Then I had to learn about halving, and I see my time's up. So must I stop now? Can I continue? Oh, that's an old clock. Yeah. All right. Please stop me at any time. I'm quite used to being heckled and stopped and all sorts of things. Then I had to learn about halving. And halving happens every 4 years when Bitcoin miners only get half the number of Bitcoin that they got 4 years previously, or for the previous 4 years, which is a kind of built-in mechanism to ensure that by 2140, which is about 115 years from now, there are 21 million Bitcoin on the blockchain, and that no more are created, creating that critical scarcity value and pushing up the price over time. So this is all bloody ingenious, frankly, and I got more and more intrigued, but I certainly was not going to put my foot anywhere in the water. When you're my age, you don't take a risk with your savings, and that's what everybody tells you. Well, I watched the price of Bitcoin. I said, well, that bird has flown. I missed that, but I was glad my son caught the wave. And then I was watching very carefully over time, and of course, in the end, if you can't beat them, join them. So, when I heard about the most expensive pizza in history, have you heard about that? Know about that? The pizza, 2 pizzas actually, I mustn't exaggerate, 2 pizzas got sold for 10,000 Bitcoin. That is 200 million Rand, if my calculation is correct today. I wish I'd baked and sold those pizzas. And when I heard of this kind of thing, and I'd advised my son long and often enough not to do this crazy thing, he started calling me Mrs. Buffett, because he certainly said I wasn't Warren Buffett. And he used to say to me things like HFST, and when I worked out what that acronym was, it's have fun staying poor, and various other things. So eventually I had to humble myself and go to him and ask him to open a Luno account for me. And of course, there was a lot of sarcastic comments and a lot of eye-rolling and all of that sort of thing. But about 5 years ago, I took the plunge, gradually and carefully. And of course, like all people who take the plunge, I was checking the value every 5 minutes. And he said, don't do that, man. Checking the value every 5 minutes. And for the very first time in my life, I bought at probably the lowest point, obviously since the first huge rise, but it was about 2022 or somewhere around that. And I've been enjoying the fruits ever since, and now I wish I put all my savings into it. But I'm very glad that I at least put some, not very much, because I'd take tiny amounts at the end of every month that I had left over from my salary and put it in. So now I'm getting quite daring. So when President Trump got elected and got Elon Musk to start a Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, I said, I've got to buy Dogecoin. And off I went and bought Dogecoin. Now, I had to read up about a meme coin, and I know it was started as a joke, but now I'm incredibly pleased that there's a coin, a response coin, a revenge coin called Zille, if you don't mind. Zille. And I will be investing quite a lot more in Zille if you haven't heard of it before. Right. Now, there's a whole lot of other information that I got from one of my colleagues called Matt Burke, who knows a lot about these things. And he obviously emphasizes that crypto is a highly volatile asset. And he says that he would never advise anyone to have more than 5 to 10% of their assets in crypto at this stage, especially at my age when you need to have some security. But he says that there are very important experiments around the world, and El Salvador, where Lutando is off to soon, is one of the key ones where the president decided to have Bitcoin as a strategic reserve, I think it was. And is that right? And I read a bit of the background of that, and it was because he sees a multipolar world coming in which the reserve currency is likely to be a basket of currencies that includes Bitcoin, and he wanted to protect El Salvador from the risk of being held hostage by the primacy of the American dollar, and that internal El Salvadorian policies might be impacted by the extent to which they were dependent on the dollar as the reserve currency. I know that the guy Nick wearing the Make America Great Again hat is not going to be very pleased with what I'm saying here, but El Salvador did that. And although it hasn't been a huge success as an experiment at this stage, they did pay $45,000 per Bitcoin, and we all know that it's over $100,000 per Bitcoin now, so it was absolutely not a bad investment for them. Now, let me also look at this very interesting thing called stable coins. I'm sure you all know about stable coins. Now, we are lucky in South Africa because we have a reserve bank that does do inflation targeting, and I promise you, for all the people who don't believe that's important, it is important. If you have rampant inflation in your country, as America now has, which is one of the key reasons why Trump got elected, if you have rampant inflation in your country, you can get paid money and it's worth less and less and less. And you save that money and it's worth less and less and less. And if you live in a country where it is illegal to hold dollars, and it is illegal to hold dollars in South Africa, and it is illegal through most of Africa to hold dollars, because we need foreign reserves and you have to pay those dollars to the Reserve Bank and get paid back in rands, we all know that. It then means that you have a currency that is devaluing in most of the rest of Africa. Fortunately, we seem to mostly have inflation under control here. Well, I promise you, compared, it's under control here. But in the rest of the continent, the kinds of inflation rates, the most extreme example, obviously, was Zimbabwe, when you can buy a loaf of bread for 3 trillion Zimbabwean dollars or something like that. That is in another league, of course. But then to get your salary and then immediately buy stable coin, which is dollar denominated, and then retain it in a dollar denominated stable coin, which you can get back any time without paying tax or anything like that, that's a really nice option. And I have looked at that, and not that I'm thinking about it, because I don't think we need to right now, but it makes a lot of sense for many countries. Right. The last thing I want to say is this. I remember opening the Silicon Cape years and years ago when I didn't actually even understand the potential of bringing the cutting edge of information and communication technology and computer technology to the Western Cape. I just knew it was exciting and I knew it had to happen. And I've maintained my interest ever since then. And I do think that Cape Town can be the crypto capital of South Africa. It already is. We'll probably have to fight hard with Nairobi because they're always on the cutting edge of these things, but we can. And I think this must be the only city in the world that I know of whose skyline is dominated by the name of one of the Bitcoin exchanges. So if you're driving into Cape Town, the first thing you see at the top is Luno. And that's the biggest sign, the most obvious sign. It's a nice color, especially for me. So I like that very much. But it is crucial. Now, finally, people have asked me to say a few words about cryptocurrency and our sovereign debt. Now, I really know absolutely nothing about that. So I had to ask Ashil Saroopan. And Ashil Saroopan is a DA, Deputy Minister of Finance, and he knows all about these things because he's about 34. So he has to teach me and I have to listen. And he says, this, I hope I got him right. He says he's a very strong supporter of cryptocurrency, but not as a solution to our sovereign debt. The scale of debt in South Africa is such that if we use unclassified assets, it could trigger a major increase in the risk premium on the bond market, which in turn would trigger currency issues. While there is scope for the Reserve Bank, Treasury, or the Public Investment Corporation to test crypto assets, Ashil would not advise it for dealing with our debt because the way it is structured creates too many risks that would blow up the cost of borrowing, trigger a massive debt recall and trigger a currency crisis. This is because our debt is 90% rand denominated, sold through bond market auctions on a guaranteed yield with specific payment coupons at specific dates. Then he says, there are no fixes for the debt problem other than curtailing our expenditure in the state, limiting future borrowing, growing the economy, and lowering the debt to GDP ratio. Right, so that's what he says. And I take him dead seriously because he is very clued up on finance. He's got several degrees in the area. He keeps right up to date with crypto. He understands our debt. He understands our balance sheet. And he understands exactly what South Africa has to do to get our way out of this. And he's done heroic work on trying to get the medium-term budget policy statement and now the upcoming budget to ensure that we're not borrowing to fund operational expenditure and that we've got a debt anchor. So we can be very grateful to him. So that is my own personal journey, which I was asked to speak about in the whole world of crypto. I'm now kind of hooked, and I now put every spare penny I can, and it's a spare penny, not main savings, spare penny into that, because I'm very excited to see what happens. I'm a bit of a gambler at heart. But I do accept that it's not a Ponzi scheme anymore, and there are very prominent bankers in this country who still think that it is. And I'm not going to spend my Bitcoin at any shop, because if the value of Bitcoin is increasing, why should I spend it at today's rates? And I think that that is going to be one of the biggest blocks to using it as tender, because if people say it could still double or triple in value in the next 15 years, why must I spend it now? I'll be sorry that I did. So that's my thinking. It might not be the way economists think, but I am really pleased to have got into it, even though it was late, and I like to retrospectively dream on what I might have done if I had put much more in much earlier. Thank you.